He shouldn't have trusted me with those words, but Lily said them anyway. If you had told me to go back that night, I probably wouldn't be alive right now. The sentence hung in the air between us like something fragile that could shatter if either of us moved. She stood in the doorway of my apartment again, just like the first time. Same hallway, same tired light buzzing above us, but everything else was different. It had been 3 months since the night she knocked on my door at 12:03 a.m. 3 months since I opened that door and saw a woman who looked like she had already lost the fight with her life. Now she looked stronger. Not perfect. Not completely healed, but steady in a way she hadn't been before. In her hand she held something small, a silver key. She slowly placed it on the table between us. "That's the key to my new place," she said quietly. "New city, new start." I looked at the key, then back at her. "And you came back just to give me that?" I asked. She shook her head. "No." Her voice softened. "I came back because you deserve to know what almost happened that night." My stomach tightened a little, because suddenly that midnight knock didn't feel like a simple moment of kindness anymore. It felt like the edge of something much darker. Lily took a slow breath and looked down at her hands. "You remember what I said when you opened the door?" I nodded. Of course I remembered, every word. I don't want to go back home tonight." At the time it sounded like someone escaping a bad argument. Now it sounded like something else entirely. Lily looked up again and her eyes held mine in a way that made it impossible to look away. "I almost didn't knock," she said, and just like that the memory came rushing back. That night, the knock, the hallway, the moment everything changed. It started with 3 quiet taps, soft enough that I almost ignored them. I was half asleep on the couch with the TV still playing some late-night rerun when the sound reached me. 3 gentle knocks, not urgent. Not angry, just uncertain. At first I thought it came from the TV, but then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up slowly. Midnight knocks don't usually mean anything good. My apartment building was the kind of place where everyone kept to themselves. People nodded politely in the hallway and then disappeared behind their doors. No one visited each other at midnight. For a moment I just sat there listening. The hallway outside was silent. Then the knocking came again, even softer, like whoever stood outside my door was already regretting the decision. I got up and walked toward the door. I remember thinking something strange as my hand reached the handle. Whoever this is, they're scared. I don't know how I knew that. Maybe it was the hesitation in the knock. Maybe it was the silence afterward, but something about it felt less like a demand and more like a question. I opened the door, and there she was, Lily. My neighbor from across the hall. We weren't friends. We weren't even close. Just 2 people who happened to share a hallway and occasionally exchanged quick greetings. But the woman standing in front of me that night didn't look like the one I recognized. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were red. Mascara had run down her cheeks in dark lines like she'd been crying for hours. And she was shaking. Not the kind of shaking someone gets from cold. The kind that comes from adrenaline, from fear, from holding yourself together for just a little longer. For a few seconds neither of us said anything. The hallway light flickered above us, buzzing softly. Finally she spoke. Her voice was barely louder than the hum of the light. I don't want to go back home tonight." She said it like someone confessing a secret they weren't sure they were allowed to say. I glanced toward the apartment across the hall. Her door was closed. Everything looked normal, too normal. But when I looked back at her, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. She was gripping her phone so hard her knuckles had turned white, like it was the only thing keeping her steady. "How long have you been standing out here?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. Then she gave a small, embarrassed shrug. "About an hour." An hour. I looked at her again, the tired eyes, the shaking hands, the way she kept glancing down the hallway like she expected someone to appear, and suddenly the answer felt obvious. I stepped aside. "You can come in." She didn't move right away. For a moment she just stood there staring at the floor. Like crossing that doorway meant admitting something she hadn't said yet. Then slowly, carefully, she stepped inside. My apartment wasn't impressive. Small living room, old couch, kitchen that still smelled like the frozen pizza I had burned earlier. but Lily looked around like she had just entered the safest place in the world. She sat down on the couch, and then she broke. Not the quiet, crying people try to hide, not the polite, kind people apologize for. This was the kind of crying that comes out when someone has been holding everything inside for far too long. Her shoulders shook. Her breathing came out uneven. She tried to cover her face with her hands, but the tears kept coming. I didn't ask questions. Sometimes people don't need questions. Sometimes they just need silence. So I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and set it on the table in front of her. She didn't touch it at first. She just stared at the floor. Minutes passed. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, she wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. Her voice came out shaky. I sat in my car for an hour before knocking. I leaned against the wall and waited. She swallowed. Then she said something that made the room feel colder. I kept asking myself if asking for help would make me look weak. Her fingers wrapped slowly around the glass of water. But then something happened upstairs tonight. She stopped. Her hand trembled. I noticed she hadn't once looked toward the door across the hall since coming inside. Almost like pretending it didn't exist. What happened? I asked gently. Lily didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the floor again. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. The person I live with. She paused. Is not the same person I thought I fell in love with. The sentence sat heavily in the room. I didn't ask for details, but the way she flinched when footsteps echoed faintly somewhere down the hallway outside told me enough. And the way she kept glancing at my door, like it might open at any second, told me something else. Whoever lived in that apartment with her might come looking. And suddenly I realized something I hadn't thought about when I opened that door. Tonight wasn't just about helping a neighbor. Tonight might be about protecting her. And neither of us had any idea what would happen next. Lily kept staring at the door like it might open on its own, like someone might walk through it without knocking. For a while neither of us spoke. The room felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel loud. The clock ticked, the refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the hallway a pipe creaked inside the walls. Lily flinched at that, just a small movement, barely noticeable, but I saw it. And once you notice something like that, you can't unsee it. She wasn't just upset. She was afraid. Not the kind of fear people feel after an argument, not the kind that fades after a few hours. This was the kind of fear that stays in your muscles. I sat down in the chair across from the couch and tried to keep my voice calm. You don't have to explain anything tonight, I told her. Her eyes lifted slightly. But you can stay here, I continued, as long as you need. She looked at me like she didn't quite believe it. Really? Yeah. She let out a slow breath, the kind people release when they've been holding it for too long. For the first time since she walked in, her shoulders lowered just a little, but the tension didn't completely disappear, it just shifted. She picked up the glass of water and took a small sip, then another. Her hands were still trembling. Thank you, she said quietly. I nodded. Of course. Another silence followed, but this one felt different, less sharp, less fragile. Lily leaned back into the couch slowly, like she was testing whether it would hold her weight. Can I ask you something? She said, Sure. Why did you open the door? The question surprised me. What do you mean? She shrugged slightly. It's midnight. You barely know me. Most people would pretend they didn't hear the knock. I thought about that for a moment. Honestly, I didn't have a dramatic answer. I don't know, I admitted. Her eyebrow lifted a little. I guess it just sounded like someone needed help. She looked down again, her voice softened. I did. We sat there quietly for a while after that. Eventually she spoke again. His name is Mark. The name came out flat, like it no longer belonged to someone she loved. He wasn't always like this, she continued slowly. At least I don't think he was. I stayed quiet and let her talk. That's the confusing part about people, she said. You don't notice when they change. Her fingers traced the rim of the glass. At first it was small things, Little arguments about bills, chores, dumb stuff. She gave a tired smile. You know, the kind of fights couples laugh about later. I nodded, but then the arguments started lasting longer. Her eyes stayed on the table, and they started getting louder. She swallowed, and meaner. The room felt smaller somehow. The worst part wasn't the yelling, she said. What was it? She hesitated, then she answered. It was how normal it started to feel. That sentence sat in the air between us, because I knew exactly what she meant. When something happens slowly enough, you stop noticing it, like a room getting darker at sunset. You don't realize how much light has disappeared until it's already night. Lily leaned forward slightly. Tonight it got worse. Her voice grew quieter. He threw something. My jaw tightened. What did he throw? She shook her head. It doesn't matter. But the way she said it told me it mattered a lot. And after that, I asked gently. She stared at the floor again. I left. You just walked out. Yeah. She gave a small, humorless laugh. I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove around the block 3 times. Her fingers tapped lightly against the glass. I didn't know where to go. That part hit me harder than anything else she'd said, not knowing where to go. That's a lonely feeling. I thought about going back, she admitted. Why? Her answer came quickly. Because it was familiar. That word hung heavy. Familiar. Sometimes people stay in bad places simply because they're known places. At least you know what to expect there. The unknown can feel scarier than the pain you understand. Lily leaned back again and rubbed her eyes. I sat in the car outside the building for almost an hour, she said. I kept telling myself I was being dramatic. Her voice cracked slightly. I kept thinking maybe I should just go upstairs and pretend nothing happened. She looked at me again, but then I saw your light on. I frowned slightly. My light? Yeah. She nodded toward the living room lamp. I could see it from the parking lot. I hadn't thought about that. To me it was just a lamp. To her it had been something else. A sign someone was awake, someone was there. I almost drove away anyway, she said quietly. But then I remembered something my little brother told me once. You have a brother. Yeah, he's 10. Her expression softened slightly when she said that. A few months ago he said something weird. What? She smiled faintly. He told me that if you ever feel scared, you should go where the lights are. I blinked. Kids say things like that sometimes. Simple words, but somehow they stick with you. So I walked upstairs, she continued, and I stood outside your door for 5 minutes. 5 minutes? She nodded. I kept raising my hand to knock and then putting it back down. Why? Her answer came slowly. Because asking for help means admitting something is wrong. That made sense, and for a lot of people that's the hardest part. Lily looked toward the door again. The fear returned briefly to her eyes. You're sure he can't get in here? She asked quietly. I shook my head. No, the doors lock automatically. She nodded, but the tension in her shoulders stayed. Then something else crossed her face, something uncertain. There's something else, she said. My stomach tightened a little. What? She hesitated again, like the words were heavier than the others. Mark might come looking for me. The sentence landed hard. Does he know you're here? I don't think so. Think, that wasn't the most comforting word. Lily's voice grew even quieter. But when I left, he was really angry. I sat up a little straighter in the chair. How angry? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the hallway again, like she was remembering something she didn't want to say. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. He said if I walked out that door. She swallowed. I better not come back. The room went silent again, but this time the silence felt heavier, because now there was a new question hanging between us. Not just whether Lily would go back, but whether someone might come here looking for her, and neither of us knew which would happen first. For the next few minutes, neither of us said anything. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was thick, watchful. Both of us listening for something that might never come. Footsteps in the hallway, another knock, a voice, anything. Lily sat on the couch with her hands wrapped around the glass of water, staring at the floor like she was replaying the last few hours inside her head. I tried to act normal, but I found myself glancing at the door every few seconds, just in case. Finally, Lily spoke again. "I'm sorry." I looked at her. "For what?" "For bringing this to your door." Her voice carried a quiet kind of guilt, the kind people feel when they think their problems are too heavy for someone else. "You didn't bring anything," I said. She looked up slightly. "You just knocked." That seemed to land somewhere inside her. She nodded slowly, like she was letting that idea settle. But the tension didn't fully disappear. She still looked tired in a way that sleep alone couldn't fix. "Can I ask you something else?" She said, "Sure." "What do you do when someone you love becomes someone you don't recognize anymore?" The question hung in the air. It wasn't really a question about advice. It was a question about permission. Permission to stop loving someone, or maybe permission to leave. I leaned back in my chair and thought about it. "I think," I said slowly, "that sometimes people don't change." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes," I continued, "they just stop pretending." Her eyes widened a little, and for a moment she looked like someone had just said something she had been thinking for months but never said out loud. "That's exactly how it felt," she admitted. She rubbed her hands together slowly, like one day the mask just came off. Her voice grew quieter, and I realized the person standing in front of me wasn't the one I fell in love with. She took another sip of water, then set the glass down. "I keep replaying everything in my head," she said, "looking for the moment when it changed." "Did you find it?" She shook her head. "No." Her eyes drifted toward the window. "Maybe there wasn't a moment." That idea seemed to settle heavily between us. Some changes happen slowly, too slowly to notice until you're already living inside them. After a while, Lily shifted slightly on the couch. "Can I ask you something weird?" I smiled faintly. "You can ask anything tonight." She hesitated, then said something unexpected. "Do you ever feel like your life is just paused?" I raised an eyebrow, paused. "Yeah." She gestured vaguely with her hand, like you're waiting for something to start. That question caught me off guard, because the honest answer was yes, more often than I like to admit, but instead of saying that, I shrugged. "Sometimes." She nodded slowly. "I think that's why I stayed with Mark longer than I should have." I stayed quiet. She looked down again. "I kept telling myself things would get better." Her voice softened, that the real version of him would come back. She gave a small, sad smile. "But tonight something changed." "What?" She lifted her head. For the first time, I realized I wasn't waiting for things to get better. What? Her eyes looked clearer now. "I was just waiting for permission to leave." That sentence settled heavily in the room, and I realized something important. Sometimes people don't need a rescue, they just need a place where they feel safe enough to make a decision. Lily leaned back again, exhaustion starting to show on her face. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright was slowly fading. Her eyelids looked heavier. "You should try to sleep," I said gently. She nodded but didn't move. Instead, she looked around the room again, not nervous this time, just thoughtful. "Your place feels calm," she said. I chuckled softly. "It's mostly because nothing exciting ever happens here." She gave a tired laugh. "Tonight was exciting enough." That was one way to put it. I grabbed a blanket from the hallway closet and handed it to her. "You can take the couch." "What about you?" "I've slept in worse places." She opened the blanket slowly and wrapped it around herself. The moment she did, something in her posture changed. Like her body finally realized it was safe enough to relax. Her shoulders lowered. Her breathing slowed. But before she lay down, she looked at me again. There was something serious in her expression. "Can I tell you one more thing?" "Of course." She hesitated, then reached into the pocket of her sweater. When her hand came back out, she was holding something small, a thin silver bracelet. It looked simple, but worn, like it had been on her wrist for years. She stared at it for a moment before speaking. "My little brother gave this to me." I leaned forward slightly. "When?" "On my last birthday." Her voice softened when she talked about him. "He said it was for protection." She gave a small smile. Kids believe things like that. She turned the bracelet slowly between her fingers. "But tonight, when I was sitting in the car." Her voice slowed. I kept holding it. The room grew quiet again, and I kept thinking about something he told me. "What did he say?" She looked up. Her eyes glistened slightly. "He said if anyone ever makes you feel small." Her fingers closed around the bracelet. "You should go somewhere people remind you how big your heart actually is." The words sat quietly between us. Simple, but powerful in that honest way kids sometimes manage. Lily slid the bracelet back onto her wrist, then finally lay down on the couch. She pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. For the first time that night, her body seemed still, truly still. The kind of stillness that comes when someone finally believes they might be safe. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft glow from the kitchen light. Minutes passed. Her breathing grew slow and steady. She had fallen asleep. But just as I started to head toward the bedroom, Lily spoke again. Her voice barely above a whisper, half asleep. "Hey." I turned. "Yeah." Her eyes were closed, but a small smile touched her face. "Thank you for opening the door." I watched her for a moment, then quietly replied, "You're welcome." I thought the night was finally over. I thought the hardest part had already passed, but about 20 minutes later, a loud sound echoed through the hallway, a door slamming, heavy footsteps, and then a man's voice, angry, loud, getting closer, and suddenly I realized something. Mark wasn't finished with tonight. He was coming down the hallway, and he might already know exactly where Lily was. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. For a second the whole hallway went quiet. Too quiet. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, listening. Lily was still asleep on the couch, the blanket pulled up around her shoulders. Her breathing was slow and steady, like her body had finally allowed itself to rest after hours of tension. I didn't want to wake her, not unless I had to. But then a shadow passed under the gap at the bottom of my door. Someone was standing there, and a moment later, knock, knock, not gentle like Lily's had been, hard, demanding. My chest tightened. I walked slowly toward the door but didn't open it. Instead, I stayed on my side of it. "Yeah," I called out. A man's voice answered immediately. "Is Lily in there?" So he knew, or at least he suspected. I glanced back at the couch. Lily hadn't moved. "Who's asking?" I said. A pause, then the voice again. "Mark." The name landed exactly the way I expected it to. Flat, cold. I leaned slightly closer to the door but kept the chain lock firmly in place. "It's late," I said calmly. "Come back tomorrow." Another pause, longer this time. Then I heard his hand hit the door, not a full punch, but enough to make the wood shake slightly. "Don't play games with me," Mark said. His voice was lower now, controlled in that way angry people sometimes are when they're trying not to explode. "I know she's in there." Behind me, the couch shifted. Lily had woken up. She sat up slowly, her eyes wide with panic. I raised my hand toward her in a quiet gesture. "Stay calm, don't move," but her breathing had already changed. Faster now, fear coming back all at once. Mark knocked again, harder. "Lily." His voice echoed down the hallway. "You can't hide in there forever." The words hit the room like something thrown through a window. I kept my voice steady. "She doesn't want to talk right now." The hallway went silent again. Then Mark laughed, not a friendly laugh. The kind that carries frustration underneath it. "She doesn't want to talk." His tone turned mocking. "Since when does Lily make decisions without me?" That sentence told me everything I needed to know about the kind of relationship they had. Behind me, Lily pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Her fingers clutched the silver bracelet on her wrist. Mark spoke again. "Look, he said, his voice suddenly calmer. "We had a fight, that's all." I didn't answer. "Couples fight," he continued. "It happens." Another pause, then his voice softened in a way that sounded practiced. "Lily, come on, let's go home." The word home hung in the hallway, but it didn't sound warm. It sounded like a trap. From the couch, Lily shook her head slowly. Her lips barely moved. "No." She wasn't saying it to Mark. She was saying it to herself. Mark knocked again, not as hard this time, almost patient. "Lily," he called, "we can talk about this." Still no response. He sighed loudly. Then his voice changed again, less calm now. "Or do you want to make a scene in front of the neighbors?" That sentence made my jaw tight. Classic move, turn the situation into her fault, make her feel embarrassed for leaving. "Go home, Mark," I said. There was another long silence. Then footsteps shifted outside the door. For a moment I thought he was leaving, but instead his voice came closer to the door, lower, angrier. "You don't know anything about our relationship." He wasn't wrong, but I knew enough. "I know she doesn't want to come back tonight," I replied. The hallway went quiet again. Then he said something that made the room feel colder. "You think she told you everything?" I didn't answer. "She didn't," Mark continued. His tone carried a strange confidence now. "She never tells the full story." Behind me, Lily's breathing grew sharper, like those words had hit something sensitive. Mark kept talking. "You want to know why we were fighting tonight?" My hand tightened on the door handle, because suddenly I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the answer. "She was planning to leave," he said. I glanced back at Lily. Her eyes were wide. "She thinks she deserves better than me," Mark continued bitterly. "She packed a bag this afternoon." That was new information. I looked at Lily again. She slowly nodded, just once. Mark laughed again. "She thought she could just walk away." His voice hardened. "After everything I've done for her." I leaned closer to the door. "Whatever happened between you two," I said firmly, "it's over for tonight." Mark didn't respond right away. Then he said something quietly, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "You know what the funny part is?" I waited. "She always comes back." The confidence in his voice was unsettling, like this wasn't the first time she had tried to leave. Behind me, Lily whispered something, so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Not this time." Her voice trembled, but the words were firm. I looked back at the door. "You heard her," I said. Silence, long silence. Then finally, footsteps slow, moving away down the hall. I stayed at the door for another 30 seconds just to be sure. No more voices, no more movement, just the quiet hum of the building again. I exhaled slowly and turned back toward the living room. Lily was sitting upright now, her arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes followed me as I walked back. "Did he leave?" she asked softly. "Yeah." She nodded but didn't relax yet. Her fingers still clutched the bracelet. "Thank you," she whispered again. I sat down across from her. "You okay?" She thought about that question, then gave a small shrug. "I think so." But something about her expression had changed. The fear was still there, but something else had appeared beside it. Resolve. She looked toward the door across the hallway, then back at me, and said something that sounded more like a promise than a thought. "He's wrong about one thing." "What's that?" I asked. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I'm not going back." For a while after Mark's footsteps faded down the hallway, neither of us spoke. The apartment was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. Before, the silence had been filled with fear, the kind that makes every small sound feel like a warning. Now the silence felt different, heavy, like the room itself was waiting to see if Lily truly meant what she had just said. She sat on the couch with the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her fingers still held the silver bracelet, turning it slowly around her wrist. I noticed something. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. They were still. Not relaxed, but steady. "You sure you're okay?" I asked again. She nodded slowly. "I think hearing him tonight helped." That wasn't the answer I expected. Helped how? She looked toward the door. For a long time I kept wondering if maybe I was exaggerating things, she said quietly. If maybe I was the one making our problems bigger than they really were. That kind of doubt is common in situations like hers. People slowly start believing the version of reality someone else keeps repeating. You know, she continued, when someone tells you enough times that you're overreacting, eventually you start believing it. Her voice softened, but tonight I heard something different. What? The way he talked to you. She looked back at me. That's the voice I've been hearing for months. There was no anger in her tone, just clarity, and clarity can be powerful. She leaned back into the couch again. I don't think I noticed how bad things had gotten until I heard him talk like that to someone else. That made sense. Sometimes it's easier to recognize cruelty when it's aimed at someone outside the relationship. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. You hungry? I asked. She blinked a little. I hadn't thought about food all night. That usually means you should eat something. I opened the fridge. There wasn't much inside. A half carton of eggs, some leftover pasta, and a container of takeout noodles from 2 days ago. Not exactly a five-star menu, I admitted. She gave a small, tired smile. I think anything would taste amazing right now. So I made scrambled eggs, nothing fancy, just eggs, a little salt, and toast. The kind of simple meal people make when they don't know what else to do but still want to help somehow. When I brought the plate over, Lily looked at it like I had just served her something incredible. Thank you, she said again. You've said that about 10 times tonight. Probably not enough. She took a bite, then another, and slowly some of the color returned to her face. While she ate, we talked about small things, movies, work, the terrible frozen pizza I had burned earlier. Nothing serious, just normal conversation. The kind that helps your brain remember that life isn't always made of tense moments and hard decisions. After a while, she finished the plate and leaned back again. I didn't realize how exhausted I was, she admitted. That happens when adrenaline wears off. She nodded, then her eyes drifted toward the hallway again, but this time the fear wasn't there, only distance, like the apartment across the hall already belonged to a different life. You know something strange, she said. What? For months, I kept imagining this huge, dramatic moment when I would finally leave. She gestured around the quiet living room. I thought it would feel big. Does it? She shook her head slowly. No. Her voice softened. It just feels calm. Sometimes the biggest life changes happen in quiet rooms, not dramatic scenes, just quiet decisions. Lily pulled the blanket a little tighter around herself. I think I was waiting for someone to rescue me, she admitted. You know, some big moment where everything suddenly made sense. She gave a small laugh, but that's not what happened. No. She looked at me. No. Her eyes softened slightly. I just knocked on a door. The way she said it carried a kind of quiet realization, like the meaning of that small action had grown bigger as the night passed. I guess sometimes that's all it takes, I said. She nodded. Then her hand moved to the bracelet again. I want to tell my brother about this someday, she said. What part? That his advice actually worked. The lights. She smiled. Yeah. Her eyes drifted toward the lamp beside the couch. That stupid little lamp might have saved me tonight. I chuckled. I'll never look at it the same way again. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then Lily sat up straighter. There was something thoughtful in her expression now. I think I need to go back over there tomorrow. I frowned slightly. To Mark. She shook her head. No. Her voice was calm. To my apartment. She looked toward the hallway. My things are still there. That made sense. You don't have to go alone, I said. She glanced at me. You'd really come with me. Of course. She nodded slowly. Thank you. Another small silence passed. Then Lily asked something unexpected. Can I ask you one last question? Sure. Why are you helping me? I blinked. That's a strange question. Not really. She looked at me carefully. We barely know each other. That was true, but sometimes people don't need a long history to show basic kindness. I thought about the question for a moment, then answered honestly. Because 3 hours ago you knocked on my door looking like the world had just collapsed. She listened quietly, and I figured if someone gathers that much courage just to ask for help. I shrugged. The least I can do is answer. Lily looked down at her hands again, then something in her expression softened. Mark always said strangers wouldn't care about me, she said quietly. That if I ever left, no one would help. She looked up again. I guess he was wrong. I leaned back in my chair. Looks that way. The clock on the wall read 2:04 a.m. The night was finally starting to slow down. Lily stretched slightly on the couch. You should probably sleep, I said. You too. She lay down again and pulled the blanket over herself. Within a few minutes her breathing slowed. This time the sleep looked deeper, real rest, not the fragile half-sleep from earlier. I turned off the kitchen light and headed toward my bedroom. But before I closed the door, I glanced back one last time. Lily was asleep. Her hand rested on the bracelet, and the small lamp beside the couch cast a warm circle of light around her. At the time, I thought that night was simply about helping someone through a hard moment. I didn't realize something else had already begun. Because the next morning, Lily would walk into that apartment across the hall one last time. And when she came back out, she would carry something that would change both of our lives in a way neither of us expected. The next morning started quietly. Sunlight slipped through the curtains and spread across the living room floor. The kind of soft morning light that makes everything feel calmer than it actually is. For a moment I forgot what had happened the night before. Then I saw Lily. She was sitting near the window with a cup of coffee in her hands. I hadn't even heard her get up. She looked different in daylight, still tired, but clearer somehow, like someone who had finally stepped out of a storm and was slowly realizing the sky might stay clear. Morning, she said softly. Morning. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. You sleep okay? I asked. She nodded. Better than I have in months. That sentence told me a lot. We sat quietly for a few minutes, just drinking coffee and watching the morning traffic move slowly outside. No rush, no tension, just a calm moment before the next step. Finally, Lily set her cup down. I'm ready. I knew what she meant. The apartment across the hall, her things, the last piece of the life she was leaving behind. You still want me to come with you? I asked. She looked at me like the answer was obvious. Yes. So we stepped into the hallway together. It felt strange walking those few steps. Her door was only about 10 feet away, but somehow it felt farther than that, like the distance between two different chapters of her life. Lily stood in front of the door for a moment. Her hand hovered near the key. I could see the memories moving across her face. Arguments, long nights, the slow weight of something that had once been love. Then she took a breath and unlocked the door. The apartment inside felt heavy, not messy, not destroyed, just quiet in a way that carried old tension. Like the walls remembered every fight that had happened there. Lily walked in slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She just started gathering her things. Clothes, a few books, a framed photo of her and her brother, a small plant from the windowsill, normal things, but each one felt like a small piece of her life being reclaimed. I helped carry boxes down the hallway, back and forth, 2 trips, 3. Neither of us spoke much. There wasn't much to say. After the last box was packed, Lily stood in the middle of the empty living room. Her eyes moved slowly across the space, not with sadness, with closure. Strange, she said quietly. What? I thought leaving would feel dramatic. She smiled faintly, but it just feels finished. She turned toward the door, but just before stepping out she paused. Something on the kitchen counter caught her eye. She walked over and picked it up. It was a small keychain, simple, silver, the kind landlords give you when you first move in. She stared at it for a second, then slipped it into her pocket. What was that? I asked. The key to this place, she said. you keeping it?" She nodded, just as a reminder. Of what? Her answer came quietly, that I walked away. We carried the final box downstairs to her car. The morning air felt fresh, like the world had quietly reset overnight. Lily closed the trunk and leaned against the car for a moment. Then she looked at me. There were tears in her eyes, but they weren't the same tears from the night before. These were lighter, grateful. "I don't think I ever thanked you properly," she said. "You've thanked me plenty." Still, she took a step closer. "If you hadn't opened your door last night—" Her voice caught slightly. "I might have convinced myself to go back upstairs." I shook my head. "You made the decision." She thought about that for a moment, then smiled. "Maybe." She reached into her pocket and pulled something out. The silver bracelet. She slipped it off her wrist and held it out toward me. I frowned. "You should keep that." "I will." She placed it gently on my palm. "But I want you to hold it for a second." I looked down at the bracelet, then back at her. "Why?" She smiled softly. "My brother told me it protects people." I chuckled. "And you think it protected you?" She shook her head. "No." Her eyes met mine. "I think kindness did." She took the bracelet back and slipped it onto her wrist again. Then she opened the driver's door. "I'm heading to my friend's place for a while," she said. "Different city." "Sounds like a good plan." She nodded, then paused. "You know something." "What?" Last night didn't feel like a big life moment when it happened. I leaned against the car beside her. "What did it feel like?" She thought about that, then smiled, like knocking on a door and hoping someone would answer. She started the engine. Before closing the door, she looked at me one more time. "Take care of that lamp," she said. "The one in your living room." I laughed. "I will." Then she drove away, just like that. And life went back to normal, at least on the surface. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Lily. A photo appeared on the screen. A small apartment in a new city. Sunlight through wide windows. A plant sitting on the table and hanging beside the door. A small silver key. The caption read, "New home." A second message followed. "I start my new job tomorrow." Then a third. For the first time in a long time, I feel safe. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then another message appeared, short, simple, but somehow heavier than everything else. "Thank you for answering the door." I set the phone down and glanced toward the living room. The small lamp beside the couch was still there, still glowing quietly. And that's when something occurred to me. Most people will never realize when they're standing inside a moment that changes someone else's life. It doesn't feel dramatic. There's no music, no grand speeches. Sometimes it's just a knock at midnight. Sometimes it's letting someone sit on your couch and cry. And sometimes it's simply opening a door, because the truth is, some lives don't change because of big heroic moments. Some lives change because one person was brave enough to knock, and another person chose to answer.